The comic book industry has struggled for the last 22 years to pull itself out of a slump. And the main reason why the comic book industry has struggled for the last 22 years is because a lot of people who work in the comic book industry these days have no publishing experience. For example, your Dan Dido, who's currently running DC Comics, has never worked at a trade publishing house and he does not understand the business model for trade publishing. No matter whether you publish paperbacks, hardcovers, ebooks, or comic books and graphic novels, the business model is the same for all publications. And you have to understand how to manage a catalog when you're working in trade publishing. In trade publishing, you have to understand that managing your catalog is how you're going to generate sales for your overall catalog and to increase profits for your division. And your catalog not only consists of your titles, but it also consists of your characters. And there are three lists that consist at a publisher's catalog. And the first list is the front list. And the front list are the books that are featuring best-selling authors, best-selling artists if you're doing comics, and books that they anticipate will do well when they are initially released. These are books that get the biggest push from the publisher. These are the books that get the most support from the publisher. And these are the books that get the heaviest promotion from a publisher. So if you're a front list title, you pretty much are going to get the most support. Examples of a front list title would be your Harry Potter series, or in comics, anything that would feature the top characters like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, the Hulk, or Captain America, considered the top A-list characters. These A-list characters are pretty much going to get heavy push and heavy promotion because they are anticipated to sell well in the marketplace for the trade publisher. So they're going to get the most support from that trade publisher, and they're going to get a good chunk of the budget. The second list at a trade publisher is called the backlist. And the backlist consists of books that have previously sold, like storylines that were very successful in the previous years. These, for comics, would include comics like the Judas Contract, or the Infinity Gauntlet, or the Korvac Saga. They would usually compile these into trade paperbacks, and they would sell those on the backlist and use that to bolster their profits and use that for funding the budget for your front list titles. Usually, the backlist is considered the most profitable part of a publishing house. Your backlist titles pretty much are the bread and butter for your publishing house. If you have a publishing house and you have a strong backlist, you can pretty much have the money and resources to fund and take risks with, because your backlist titles are pretty much going to be your money makers long term. And if you have a good list of backlist titles, you can perform well for a long time. Now, your backlist not only consists of previously best-selling titles, but it also consists of nonfiction and books that are essential for any home, like your dictionaries, your thesauruses, and even your comedy books that have sold previously. So any book that came out last year usually falls into your backlist. Again, a good publishing house has a strong backlist. And your third list is considered the riskiest of all, and that's called the midlist. And the midlist is not a place that any author really wants to be for too long. Your midlist are considered books that are high risk, high concept. They feature original characters. They feature original storylines. They're often done by first-time authors or second-time authors, or in the comic book industry, first-time artists or second-time artists. And this is the place where people cut their teeth, develop their skills, and it is considered the riskiest of all because you're putting money on someone who is untested, unproven, or concepts that are untested and unproven. And in this place, it's very risky. So if you wind up in the mid-list, you don't want to be there for too long. Usually, most talents in trade publishing, if you can't prove yourself within 6 months to a year, you're pretty much gone if you're on the mid-list. They may bring you back for maybe a second book or a third book if they like you, but if you don't really pull the sales, you're pretty much gone. And in comics, it usually happens, I believe, about a year or 2 years, and you're gone too. Because if you cannot generate the sales, people are not going to deal with you too long in the mid list. Unfortunately, in today's comic book market, a lot of comics that are considered very good wind up falling into the mid list because of this mismanagement of these trade lists, these publishing lists. Because if you look at comic books today, a lot of comic book publishers will launch a 52 or 60 titles, and instead of tiering out everything, they try to launch everything at once. So they overload the front list in the hopes of getting sales. Now, when they overload the front list from the beginning, what that does is it takes a lot of second and third tier characters, and they automatically start falling into that mid list. And that's where a lot of books start to struggle, because when you wind up in the mid list, a lot of people, they cannot find your book, because they're focusing on the A-list characters primarily. And because they're so focused on the A-list characters, they don't go further down the list to the B and C characters, because they don't really feel a connection with them. And when your catalog is too big, again, it's overwhelming for the customer. The customer cannot digest all these titles all at once. I mean, when you have something like 52, 53 titles, or even 16, 17 titles, it's a bit of a challenge for the reader to be able to try to read all of these books, or even try to buy all these books, even especially when they're costing $3 and $4. And when you add that up, the customer cannot buy the entire catalog. So a lot of books wind up getting lost in the shuffle due to the way the catalog is managed, and the fact that, a lot of these books are not launched in a constructive way, where they're tiered out, over a span of a year, so that the reader can have the breathing space to decide which books they want to start with, or the books that they want to continue reading. And another big problem with your comic book business is that they do all these reboots. And when you do a reboot, you pretty much you split your list, because what really sells comics is that the front list titles will get people, if they're reading right now and they see references to old stories, what they're going to do is search out those trade paperbacks or those back issues, and that really helps your backlist sales. And when it comes on to the mid list, you can start a crossover event and then still make references to older titles, and that's going to increase your sales on both your front list titles and your backlist titles. So each part of the list is working interdependently towards generating sales for each other part. And you can't really do that when you have a reboot. When you have a reboot, what you do is you're saying, I don't have to read any of the older titles, and I can start from here, and that cuts you off from generating those sales on your backlist. And your backlist is your bread and butter. That is your money in the bank. You do not want to jeopardize your backlist. And this is something that the comic book industry, especially at the big two, have done with all these reboots, have killed their backlist. And you don't want to kill your backlist. Your backlist, again, is the money in the bank for a publisher. This is the most profitable part of your business. Those trade paperbacks, those omnibuses, that is money in the bank, again, because that material's already been printed, that material's already ready, and that material is already paid for. So it's just generating profits for you. You don't want to cut that off, and that's what a reboot does. It pretty much cuts off the profits. Moreover, it also prevents you from having that interconnection where you can make reference to old stories and then sell not only the old comics, but the new comics as well. And also, you can help these struggling mid-list titles, which pretty much need all the help and support they can get by being tied to A and B list characters who can help propel their sales, especially on new characters and new concepts. Those are the highest risk. I mean, I think about, books like your Amethyst and your I, Vampire and books like that. They tend to have, they can build a cult following, but they need all the support they can get. And it's hard to get that when you don't manage your catalog and your lists properly. If you don't know how to manage your catalog, you're not going to be able to maximize the profits from it. And this is something that many in the comic book business do not understand about managing your catalog. And your catalog if you manage it effectively, it can generate profits for decades, and it can also continuing generating profits and opening new marketplaces. Because if your front list and your back list are managed effectively, then you can start focusing a little bit more attention to the mid list, which needs, again, the most support, and they need the most promotion, because there's a lot of great books in the mid list, but a lot of them fall through the cracks because they can't get the promotion, they can't get the support, and there's no real effort to get the word out about them. And the only way a lot of mid-list books, you know, manage to find an audience primarily is because of the word of mouth from readers. Your mid-list books don't get a lot of ad space inside of a comic or a trade publishing house. They usually don't get, again, that much promotion. They don't. A lot of times they don't even get an ad. So most of the budget, again, is focused on that front list and focused on that back list. But if you manage your catalog, you can manage to put a little bit more money into your mid list, or put more money into buying concepts from a first-time author, or trying to find that first-time artist and give them that break. And that's why comics really need to have somebody who has a strong publishing background working at them, because they would understand this very essential component to running a publishing house and using that type of model to help generate sales and help increase sales. Because if you understand how the model works and how to manage the catalog, you can pretty much maximize all the profits at your comic book publishing house, and try to work on things like increasing your readership, because you understand, how these lists work and how to place these books. Instead of front loading everything, you'll know how to manage the list, tier out your publication launches so that the reader can have time to read all the publications, and find ways of doing things that help you generate revenue. Because a smart publisher will do something like they'll launch one front list title during 1 month, a mid list title, and maybe a backlist item, and that's how they'll generate sales each month. And instead of front loading everything where people are just overwhelmed, they have time to think about what they want to buy, and be able to give books a try. And one of the other mistakes that they make in catalog mismanagement is doing these big crossovers, because that way you think you're trying to compel people to buy second and third tier books, but that doesn't really help anything long term. Well, people really don't want to be, again, overwhelmed and bogged down by having to buy dozens of books that they really wouldn't want to buy. The event model from many years ago with the crossovers, that was, again, meant to spur mid-list sales, but these days it just doesn't work. And I believe it's time for a different approach, and it takes somebody who understands catalog management to try to apply a different approach to trying to fix some of the business issues that really are preventing the comic book industry from breaking out of this 22-year slump. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.